The decision for Portland is significant because Portland is one of those places where they will push back. And I think Trump knows that. And that's the reason why, while most of the discontent has been fairly civil, they are trying to make a big deal out of it in an effort to lean into the Portland is on fire narratives. They want a confrontation. They want escalation. They want a confrontation worthy of some semblance of escalation that then turns into a much larger confrontation, and then they can justify the troop deployment to a larger percentage of the population. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, but let's talk about this judge blocking the National Guard troop deployment in Oregon, saying there is no reason for there to be a troop deployment in Oregon, and hitting the Trump admin with a TRO, temporary restraining order. But of course, it's, we'll see if it's actually going to work or not, because it doesn't seem like Trump gives a shit, and will try to push for a constitutional crisis at every step. So, that's where we're at right now. Let's take a look.
Overnight in a tense Oregon
and I gotta pee real quick as well.
Blocking President Trump's attempt to deploy members of the California National Guard into Portland, saying she was troubled by the Trump administration's attempt to circumvent an order she'd issued just a day earlier. Trump had already tried to send in Oregon National Guard troops to Portland. That was halted on Saturday. The administration then tried on Sunday to send the troops in from California. Then late last night, Judge Karen Immerget, a Trump appointee, issued a new, broader order prohibiting the administration from using federal control to send any state's National Guard into Oregon, and pressing the government's attorney, saying, quote, "You are an officer of the court. Do you believe that this is an appropriate way to deal with my order, or an order that a judge issues that you disagree with, or is that an appropriate mechanism to appeal as you have done?" Over the weekend, federal officers clashed with demonstrators at the ICE headquarters in Portland, firing pepper balls and flashbangs. Portland police say they did not observe any person or property crimes committed and no arrests were made. But the Trump administration insists violent criminals are destroying Portland and troops are necessary to protect federal assets and personnel. In a ruling Saturday, the judge wrote Portland's protests were not significantly violent or disruptive, and that Trump's description of them was simply untethered to the facts. That deploying the Oregon National Guard likely exceeded his constitutional authority.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Oh, it turns out I'm glad that there is still some semblance of order within the courts, and that Donald Trump's direct attacks against the judiciary has not shook many of these judges. In the same way that these justices at the Supreme Court are obviously totally corrupt. It's interesting to see when you have Trump appointees that are obviously from a conservative background, or even all the way down to Reagan era judges turning around and being like, dude, enough. You know what I mean? This is our job. Our job is to literally put a check on what you're doing. And it's very obvious that you are leading the country into an incredibly unstable place that will have repercussions that are long lasting. Now, of course, the top slot is still overtaken by these Christ-cucked crypto fascists who don't care about anything other than appeasing the interests of their masters, whether it be the Heritage Foundation or the Federalist Society, or just American capital in general. But this kind of stuff at least gives me a little bit of confidence that maybe, this is basically the last line of defense. Now, of course, you should not sit around and wait for the courts to properly adjudicate and defend your constitutional rights. You still need to show up. You still need to make a big fuss. You still need to showcase your discontent. And it works in unison. It works in tandem. You show up, you showcase your discontent, and then people are reminded that we are not obeying in advance to the wishes of this administration as they very clearly move in the direction of full autarky, full authoritarian control over every aspect of over every aspect of the American government.
State's Attorney General pushing back against the president.
As the president, you must have an actual facts based on reality, not social media or just your gut feeling if you want to mobilize the military.
Now, to be clear, the judge's ruling simply bans the president from sending the National Guard here to Portland. Portland's police chief has also pushed back against the National Guard here. He fears that it would just escalate crowd behavior. Of course, the Trump administration has appealed.
That's the other thing. Like, it's very obvious. The decision for Portland is significant because Portland is one of those places where they will push back. And I think Trump knows that. And that's the reason why, while most of the discontent has been fairly civil, they are trying to make a big deal out of it in an effort to lean into the Portland is on fire narratives. They want a confrontation. They want escalation. They want a confrontation worthy of some semblance of escalation that then turns into a much larger confrontation, and then they can justify the troop deployment to a larger percentage of the population. Now, Portland also is unique in the sense that it has drawn the ire of conservatives for many, many years at this point. For like the last decade, Portland has been considered this like Antifa safe haven, a complete like autonomous zone for radical anarchists and things of that nature. Portland is basically like the Jimmy Kimmel, if Jimmy Kimmel was like an anarchist. Portland has been the anarchist Jimmy Kimmel placeholder for a lot of conservatives. So there is more appetite for military intervention in Portland in the eyes of like many Republicans. And I have noticed that he's not doing this kind of stuff in red states, because I think he also recognizes that if he were to pull this same shit in red states, then the red states would start also experiencing discontent and showing up, and he would start withering away his base of support. So it's not just about like punishing the liberals in general. He will inevitably punish anyone who is a naysayer, but it's clear that he's trying to do this. It's clear that he's trying to do this in like these liberal safe havens. And it's so crazy because this kind of political polarization coming from the top office, when you're supposed to be the president of all Americans and not just like a increasingly shrinking number of Americans with unlimited appetite for death and destruction that see you as a cult leader, that see you as this, heaven's mandate receiving monarchic style figure. That's not how things are supposed to operate in this country. So as long as he keeps doing this stuff while not improving people's material circumstances, I think more and more people are going to get frustrated and be like,
Loser.
all right, enough with this tomfoolery. Fix the goddamn prices, big dog. And this has been my argument. This has been my argument from the jump. Okay, we were doing Harry Emden. Harry Emden. Okay, I'm going to cover this before I go on this panel, even if it kills me.
Loser. Donald Trump may think it's a political winner, but it's a political loser. Oppose Trump deploying in the U.S. city, active duty U.S. military, 61%. The National Guard in particular, 58%. When you get 3 in 5 Americans agreeing on anything, you know if that is on the opposition side, it's a political loser. And among independents, who are, of course, that key block in the middle of the United States political electorate, we're talking about 2/3 of independents there and about who oppose the deployment of either active duty U.S. military or National Guard into U.S. cities.
What are the questions that people are asking, or what are the issues they see with these deployments?
Okay, look, I think it's that they don't buy Donald Trump's case for why these troops must go into the U.S. cities. So the New York...
I think those numbers are still, the numbers on the support side are still unimaginably high. And obviously, in a competent, normal, democratic process, like these numbers are incredible, and it should cause any administration to very quickly turn around and not do this, right? But we don't live in a normal government. We live in an abnormal government, and we live in abnormal times. And the very fact that there are still Republicans who are like, hell yeah, no, please kill some, they, thems in Portland. and it'll make me feel better is insane to me. So about what, 39% are just like invested in shooting at anarchist English majors and stuff? Like, is that what's going on? Is that where we're at? That's what I'm supposed to believe? Yeah. Adam Johnson says, engaging with public opinion is useful, but I think it's important to understand that Trump and his close band of ideological confederates do not care about the public opinion. They believe that once they're done, it'll have little bearing on who's in the White House January 21st, 2029. Now, having said that, I don't fully agree with this. The reason why I don't fully agree with this is because while it's correct that the Trump administration doesn't care about public opinion all that much, the goal here for the population in general and for all of you is to get other people on board and make this as costly as possible, make this as difficult a process as possible. When you make this a difficult process, when you don't obey in advance, for example, you cause the administration to reconsider. You cause the administration to think, okay, maybe we can't get away with this. Okay? That's how it works. That's it. That's why discontent is important. That's why discontent is extremely important. That's why protests are extremely important. No matter what the cost.
Times essentially gave you a two-pronged little answer here, right? Trump may use the National Guard to intimidate rivals, or big city crime will spiral out of control if the troops don't go into cities. What you see here is the majority that takes the case is that Trump may use the National Guard to intimidate political rivals at 51%. Just 42% of Americans agree with the Donald Trump stance that, in fact, big city crime will spiral out of control if the National Guard doesn't go into U.S. cities. So essentially what we're seeing here is Donald Trump's making a case, the Democratic opposition's making another case, and the Democratic opposition's case is winning here, and that is a big reason why what you see is you get about 3 in 5 Americans saying they don't want troops going into U.S. cities.
I cannot believe that 42% of Americans think big city crime will spiral out of control without the National Guard. And the only reason why so many Americans still, so many Americans polled still to this day believe this insanity is a direct consequence of under the Brandon administration, the liberal media, all of the local news broadcasters, and also the national news broadcasters being completely dominated by reactionary framing on crime and punishment. The notion that these cities are actually on fire. Okay? This kind of made up fear mongering has been incredibly effective in brain breaking your elderly relatives. This is something that I have actively pushed back against when Brandon was in charge, okay? And I talked about the crime panic narratives and how damaging that would be eventually. And it has been. I mean, I have all my own relatives that have fallen victim to the crime panic narratives, assuming that Democrats actually don't care about crime at all and that the only solution to crime is more aggressive apprehension initiatives, more aggressive detainment initiatives, which, of course, when pushed to its logical limit, imply the utilization of lethal force in the hands of the American military against domestic enemies. And that's where we're at. That is precisely where we're at. We wouldn't have gotten to this point if even the liberal side, if the Democrat side on this argument wasn't also completely leaning into the crime panic narratives out of fears that this was far too good a message being presented by the Republicans.
You have another really interesting way at looking at this. President Trump seems uniquely focused on Portland, on Memphis, on these cities and crime there. What do voters think he should be focused on?
Okay, so if you saw the opening slide on this.
Proof on Biden, I believe it, I just want to know. Proof on Biden, the media coverage, go back and look at my analysis and my criticism of the media coverage under the Biden administration about crime panic narratives in blue cities specifically, mostly pushed by the right, but a lot of like if you look at San Francisco, for example, like a lot of the tech CEOs who, before they actively before they openly became right wingers, right? They were also leaning into this idea that like George Soros backed woke prosecutors were actually letting criminals roam free in the streets of San Francisco and in major like Democrat run cities. One of the best examples of this is like gruesome Governor Gavin Newsom's rehabilitation initiatives that sought to address the overfilling crisis that the California prisons had in an effort to address the major crisis of having California penitentiaries overflowing with people that didn't really need to be there. He tried to get 75,000 prisoners released earlier than they normally would after they had, and there were numerous provisions on this. Like, I think it was, you had to have served 2/3 of your sentence, and you would obviously still be seen by a parole board that would see if you have actually rehabilitated or not, all this stuff. And yet, even liberals were very critical of Gavin Newsom and completely leaned into the bullshit framing. Claiming that he was just like releasing rapist pedophiles without any due process whatsoever. It was such endless bad faith argumentation that liberals were completely incapable of pushing back on. Here, this is another fantastic example of this, but with respect to ICE. Okay, Brian Schatz is the United States Senator from Hawaii. Okay, he says, why do we need snipers in our cities? Now, he said this on October 4th. Why are 6 masked men slamming a guy in a wheelchair in the ground? Why would an agent tackle a scared wife? Add the rhetoric of the president is increasing manic and angry senior advisors, and we are at a fork in the road. Adam Johnson says, Brian, you supported doubling ICE's budget last year, backing what you described as a Republican border security bill. Given ICE's lawlessness, do you think in retrospect this was a wise idea? Now, to liberals, this probably comes across as an I told you so moment. Like, this is a cynical, radical leftist by the name of Adam Johnson who's just simply trying to dunk on a Democrat at a time when we need to be united. But this is a very important issue to address because right now, we need to be on a defensive posture and we need to be united. We need to express solidarity with everyone, including liberals who are seeking to address some of the problems that this administration is engaging in. Having said that, however, it is important to make sure that liberals do address this dumb fuck behavior. Liberals do address the fact that they also leaned into the crime panic narratives, leaned into the narratives about immigrants constituting a significant national security threat because they are the ones who allowed this to happen. And the reason why we have to address this crisis and the Democrats in power setting up the stage, setting up the standard for Donald Trump to dunk on, okay, is because if in a positive turn, Democrats do come back into power, they cannot repeat these issues. They cannot repeat the same things that they've done that led to this crisis to begin with. The same goes for every single issue. Same goes for like the bullshit anti-Semitism is exploding in college campuses narratives that Democrats leaned into leading up to the election cycle because they also personally wanted to punish the naysayers. They also wanted to punish the campus protesters because they wanted to continue their allegiance with Israel as Israel was committing a genocide, right? It's completely ridiculous. And we have to do our very best to explain to people, like, if we don't reverse the trajectory, if Democrats actually hold any sort of office, we're cooked again. Next time, there is another competent Republican, a more competent Republican that comes in charge and takes over the government, and maybe a Tucker Carlson. Do you think this is a good use of your platform right now? Brian Schatz says, do you think meaningfully combating the forces of fascism require coherent and consistent counter politics and not nonstop triangulation and stupid gotchas that reinforce every racist MAGA premise? I think it does. And I think it will continue to do so moving forward. The border was a mess. Things are way worse now. And a part of What I was doing was to prevent us from landing there. Yes, the White House's cutesy triangulation gotcha paid zero political dividends, raised the salience of the issue in Republicans' favor, and now Dems have no coherent counterargument because they embraced all of the Republican central premises. Perhaps moving forward, this could be avoided. This is exactly what I was crying about over and over again in the lead up to the election. When Biden, before October 7, on October 6, as a matter of fact, unveiled his right-wing border bill, if you remember. And the reason why they did that was because they were responding to how far right people had become on the issue of the border, on the issue of immigration. And the only reason why the broader public was more right-wing than ever before in the history of the United States of America on the issue of immigration in a nation that is comprised entirely of migrants was because the Republicans had dominated the narrative with no counter messaging and no pushback whatsoever from the supposed left flank party. They didn't do that. They didn't actually take the initiative. They didn't actually follow through on their initial campaign promises. Biden made a significant amount of promises for his first 100 days of immigration, starting off the process of mass amnesty, right? They didn't do that. They didn't do any of that stuff. And there were people who were, why are you calling Dems left? No, I'm saying the Democratic Party is supposed to represent the left flank of American politics. I'm not saying that they are a leftist party or an anti-capitalist party at all. I'm saying that they are to the left of whatever the Republican Party represents. Okay, if you look at the Overton window, of course, if you look at like the Democratic Party's politics broadly, from some kind of like international standard, yes, of course, they are a center-right party, and the Republicans are a far-right party. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't leftist figures within this center-right party coalition. There are, right? The Democratic Party is currently ranging all the way from Zohran Mamdani to AOC down to the center-right figures and or the center-right expressions of politics that you see, such as leaning into the panicked, hysterical narratives that the Republicans have cultivated, such as immigrants constituting a national security threat. But they are a representative force of left flank of American politics. Yeah, they go all the way from Zohran Mamdani down to fucking John Fetterman. Okay.
Segment, right? It was, has Trump taken his eye off the ball? The American people believe, yes, John Berman, Donald Trump has taken his eye off the ball. There is too much focus on putting troops into U.S. cities. 52%, the majority of Americans agree that the Trump admin is focusing too much on that. Where do they want him to go? They want him to focus on lowering prices. 75% say there's too little focus on lowering prices. This is the reason that Donald Trump was put into office, was to lower prices. And at this particular point, 3 in 4 Americans say there is too little focus. Donald Trump is focusing on the wrong things, and they don't like the way he's going about it. And this, my friends, will tell the entire story if it holds a year from now, going into the midterm elections. If the Republicans lose control of the House, dare lose control of the Senate, it will be because they believe that Donald Trump has lost focus. He is not keeping his eye on the ball, and I
told you guys over and over again that this would happen eventually, okay? I didn't even think that it would happen this fast, but then again, I also did not think that Donald Trump would be this much of a force. I didn't think he would be this swift in ruining everything and breaking everything, okay? I thought it would have taken a little bit more time. So, yeah, my panel is supposed to be at 3, but it seems as though it's being pushed back, at least because like it being pushed. Because I'm looking at it right now. I'm looking at the panel on the side, and they're still going. They're still talking. The panel from before mine is still talking. Yeah, Donald Trump has been speed running his first year in office, and very clearly, this has been frustrating for a lot of people. And it's been so frustrating that even in the absence of good leadership from the from the Democratic Party, people have actually mobilized on their own. Okay? But yeah, this is a rare moment where I don't fully agree with Adam Johnson as far as like the Trump administration. I do agree with him when he says like the Trump administration doesn't care about popular opinion. But in general, every administration has to manage whatever kind of direction that they're taking. Okay? And even if the Donald Trump administration is very actively trying to undermine what remains of like constitutional protections in this country, okay, ultimately, if there is too much public discontent, too much public pressure, they're going to have a much harder time. Okay, I think my panel is up now. Hold on.